So, dear colleagues, it is really hard to start after these large data sets of isotopic and ADNE results. After that, my only advantage is being at home. I will speak about the children in the early and middle Bronze Age communities of Western Hungary, and I also inserted the results of the colleagues in the presentation. In Hungarian research, the prehistory, the study of gender roles and past children with modern approach started only recently. But particularly promising are case studies that present prehistoric children as creators of objects. Occasionally, tiny objects found in Bronze Age burials and settlements in Hungary fitting into children's hands shed lights on their former users. I am only mentioning this that I am aware that the archaeology of childhood cannot be limited to the study of graves. Because this way the children were buried and their grave gods reveal primarily the nature of the relationship of the adult community to the youngest generation. Nevertheless, children's graves are amongst the most informative and important sources for research, thanks to multidisciplinary studies, can provide information not only about diseases, but about their lifestyle. Age, as a role defined by biological rhythms and social norms, is a key aspect of identity archaeology as well. Through analysis of sex and age ratios and burial characteristics, we can draw conclusions about the horizontal social structure of past communities. In our presentation, the period between 2200 and 1450 BC in Hungary covers the end of the early Bronze Age and the end of the early Bronze Age and the middle Bronze Age in Hungary. At this time, the cemeteries of the Gata-Wieselburg culture were widespread in the westernmost part of Hungary, with occurrences also in Austria. In central regions of Western Hungary, this part of Hungary called also Transdanubia, there is an evidence of the continuous transition from the Kisapostak culture to the encrusted pottery. In central Hungary, the so-called Vatya culture became dominant. In Western Hungary, during this period, there was a transitional zone between two major cultural traditions. The inhumation-based Central European cultural sphere, including the Unjatica culture, in the last presentation was the topic, and the cremation practicing groups of the Carpathian Basin. On this map, you can see the different burial traditions. In central Transdanubia, the encrusted pottery culture, you can see on the map. And from the encrusted pottery culture, I will mention the case study from Moson-Szent Miklós. It is a cremation cemetery with detailed anthropological and archaeological analysis. For comparison, I included the data from the published cemeteries of the Vatya culture. As for the Gata-Wieselburg culture, I will focus in more details on the cemeteries of Nagyszeng. During the analysis of burials, the anthropologists usually estimate the age at death, either as a range or by assigning individuals to the following age categories: fetuses and neonates, young children, infant 1. I will use this category between until 6-year-old children, older children from 7 to 13, juveniles from 14 to 23 years old. Yes. Despite the variety of anthropological methods used, the estimated biological age does not correspond to the social role of the individual of the community. Among nearly 60 600 burials examined in Transdanubia, including cremation burials and inhumations. Poor bone preservation is a common issue. As a result, the proportion of children can be estimated at about 30 to 40%. Based on better preserved cemeteries and demographic models, child mortality this period likely reached 50 to 60%. In many cases, children's remains were found in multiple burials, particularly in the encrusted pottery culture, where multiple burials make up to 10 to 30% of the graves. In Western Hungary, the most common multiple burials are those of 2 adults. The second most frequent type is a burial of an adult with a child under 6 years old. In cremation burials, practical reasons may explain this pattern also. When people died at similar times, they might have been cremated together. Older children were often buried with younger ones, which prompting the question about their relationship. However, ADN analysis cannot be applied to cremated remains. Among the Gata-Wieselburg sites in Hungary, multiple inhumations are rare, about 5%, and often represent sequential interments in one grave pit. In these consecutive burials, mostly women and children were placed. My first case study is this encrusted pottery cemetery at Moson-Szent Miklós. The cemetery contained both scattered cremations and urn burials, but 2/3 of the children were found in urn graves. This pattern may reflect not only taphonomic preservation, but also deliberate community practices aimed to ensuring children's remains were protected. This care is further suggested by the higher number of ceramic vessels buried with children and by the presence of bronze objects in the graves of those under 10. The black dots means the bronzes. These small bronze items, likely the elements of attire, were placed on the pyre and survived in fragmented forms. Comparing the encrusted pottery cultures data with Vatya cemeteries shows similar trends. In both cultures, bronze ornaments appear from infancy onward. This is particularly notable in Vatya, where infant graves often include pins as well. In the encrusted pottery culture, pins only appear in burials of children older than 7. Arm spirals were part of children's attire in both groups from a young age. Due to cremation, it is difficult to reconstruct gendered dress, as biological sex often cannot be determined. Among adults over 40, both the number and the typological diversity of bronze items decline, perhaps reflecting the transmission of valued items or social roles. The Gata-Wieselburg inhumation burials from Hungary were analyzed using correspondence analysis from more sites. Bronze herring necklaces or pectorals form the female costume. Headdress traces are rare. Bronze daggers, axes, and precious metal herrings occurred in male graves, while heavy neck and spiral arm rings were also male-associated. Tough 1 to 3 ceramic vessels were common in all burials. Graves with more than 5 vessels, usually elders, women, stand out. Items like bronze neck and herrings appear from middle childhood, and arm spirals are found in younger children's graves as well. Now I would like to turn to the more detailed analysis of the burials from Nagyszent. Here, Gata-Wieselburg inhumation burials with exceptionally rich gravegods were found along the Arany stream near the Ikva River, few kilometers from the lake Neusiedl. 2 cemeteries, Laposrét and Farkasverem, roughly 1.5 kilometers apart, yielded 59 graves in total. While it is modest in number, this represents about 30% of all known Hungarian Gata-Wieselburg graves. Nearly 250 gravegods underscore its significance. I would like to mention 2 highlights: a man at Laposrét buried with a flanged axe and 4 solid gold herrings, and another at Farkasverem, interred with a copper-coated stone mace head. Both cemeteries were excavated as part of construction work, only partly, in the last 20 years. We have already published the Laposrét cemeteries. The Farkasverem cemetery anthropological analysis was carried out at Eötvös Loránd University, and the joint study on the 3 most prominent male burials was published last year. 50 radiocarbon dates have been obtained from the 2 cemeteries, and 45 carbon and nitrogen isotope measurements were carried out. To determine sex, where anthropology failed, 21 peptide analyses on dental animal were conducted in Vienna. In sum, Laposrét yielded 29 individuals, 1 undetermined, 5 children, 3 juveniles, and 21 adults elderly. Farkasverem yielded 32 individuals, 10 children, 8 juveniles, and 14 adults or elder adults. I would like to show a slide about grave gods and absolute datings. The Nagyszent burials were rich in copper and bronze items. In the 2 cemeteries, there were found 20 neck rings, bronze neck rings, and in the 2 cemeteries totaling 5 kilograms of bronze and 130 ceramic vessels. Radiocarbon data suggest a chronological overlap of the 2 cemeteries from the mid-20th to the 11th centuries BC. Since previous analyses showed that gender-specific grave gods were characteristic of these Gata-Wieselburg burials, and we were also interested in the extent to which gender-related patterns could be observed in burial practices, we considered important to determine the biological sex of individuals whose sex could not be identified anthropologically, mostly children, using biochemical methods. This was made possible through collaboration with Austrian colleagues at the Medical University of Vienna and University of Vienna, where sex-specific peptides in dental animal of 21 individuals from the 2 cemeteries were analyzed. These peptides linked to sex chromosomes and allow us to determine biological sex. According to these results, if we taking into account the 2 cemeteries, the distribution of biological sex is relatively balanced. However, at Laposrét, the majority of individuals, 51%, were female, while at Farkasverem, 65% of the individuals were identified as males. Based on the analysis of more than 200 graves from the largest Gata-Wieselburg cemetery at Hainburg in Austria, it has been established that this cultural group also followed the so-called bell-beaker tradition, with males typically laid on their left side and females on their right side. However, individuals of both sexes were placed in the grave with a southwest-northeast orientation. In the 2 cemeteries at Nagyszent, the analysis revealed that all male individuals, with a single exception, were laid on their left side. This exception is a 10 to 11-year-old boy who was buried on his right side with 2 ceramic vessels. However, boys even younger than this were found buried on their left side, in line with the adult male pattern. Among female individuals, a much more mixed picture emerges. In both cemeteries, nearly half were buried on their left and on their right side. In terms of the grave god patterns, more clear gender-related tendencies could be identified. Female individuals were typically buried with necklaces, hair rings, other clothing and headdress ornaments. Correspondence analysis also showed that ceramic vessels were closely associated with female burials. Male burials, in contrast, correlated more strongly with weapons, neck rings, and pins. Notably, arm spirals frequently found in children's graves were also closely associated with male and or boy burials. Meanwhile, the most prestigious items, gold and amber, fell outside the main male-female pattern clusters. In some, the representation of gender roles in graveyards can be observed in both cemeteries starting from childhood, with high-status items like this dagger and the only preserved bronze diadem appearing in the graves of juvenile individuals. To reconstruct the social structure of the cemetery, the method of the so-called combined social index calculation was applied. In this calculation, I ascribe a value between 1 and 100 to each burial to express the social ranking of the deceased based on qualitative and quantitative evaluation of certain chosen characteristics. Although this, of course, cannot reflect the exact situation in the past, but it could be a useful tool for the archaeological interpretation. The social index values calculated on the basis of 6 variables on the slide, including the measures of the grave pits. At Laposrét, the values of the burials show a stronger degree of differentiation, with the burial of a man over 40, accompanied by 4 gold earrings standing out. At Laposrét, the second highest value burial, but belonged to a 10 to 12-year-old girl, buried with gold and bronze earrings, necklace, neck and arm rings, and 2 ceramic vessels. Her sex was identified through this peptide analysis. At Farkasverem, a more gradual decrease. In Farkasverem, the combined social index values show a more gradual decrease due to a higher number of graves containing valuable gravegods and smaller differences in grave dimensions. At Farkasverem, the highest ranking burial was a 1920, so about a 20-year-old male buried with dagger, pin, and numerous bronze ornaments. In both cemeteries, the distribution of children's graves and young individuals' burials in terms of the combined social index is nearly even. At Farkasverem, however, the children's graves tend to cluster more within the lower social index range. In addition to the radiocarbon dating, our collaboration with HUN-REN atom key allowed us to conduct carbon and nitrogen isotope analysis on the burials from Nagyszent in order to gain insight to the dietary practices of Bronze Age communities. In this presentation, we briefly introduce the data from the Farkasverem cemetery. Among 25 successful carbon nitrogen isotope measurements from Farkasverem, 7 individuals were identified as male, 17 as females. Symbols without field indicate the children under the age of 14. Based on the high variability of carbon and nitrogen results, no clear dietary differences between sexes could be observed. The isotope values generally point to a mixed terrestrial diet. However, higher nitrogen values may indicate the use of nitrogen-rich soils and also fresh water fish consumption might also be a contributing factor, plausible given the proximity of rivers and lake Neusiedl. Among the children, 2 individuals most reliably aged at 2 and 3, these 2 individuals displayed notably elevated nitrogen values, which likely reflects breastfeeding. In contrast, 2 children between the ages of 2 and 4 showed nitrogen values around 11,000 suggesting that weaning may already have taken place. Due to poor preservation of juvenile bones, long bones were most used for the sampling and collagen extraction, which may have affected the results. More detailed analysis will be possible at a later stage of research, once the samples from the Laposrét cemetery and the faunal isotope data will be available. To conclude, I would like to highlight the role of children in the social structures of the three studied cultural units, based on burial evidence. In the Vatya culture, bronze and sometimes bone ornaments already appear in infant burials, including pins in several cases. Based on the high number of children buried with bronze objects, there is a theory that perhaps only children with wealthier families were buried in the cemetery, suggesting a form of social distinction. Children were almost always buried individually, which might imply they were seen as socially independent. In the Transdanubian encrusted pottery culture, multiple burials were more frequent, especially involving the infant one category. Still, bronze objects were often deposited in these child graves, whereas burials of individuals over 40 of age contained no bronzes. This could suggest that social status or values were transmitted through generations. Adolescents in the encrusted pottery stood out for their large number of vessels in their graves, likely reflecting some communal respect and mourning. In the Gáta-Vízzelburg culture, arm spirals are the most common bronze objects found in young children's graves. However, at Farkasverem, we can also identify status indicating neck rings in few young boys' burials. By the age of 7 to 13, often referred as middle childhood, the full repertoire of gender-specific attire and ornaments already appears in the burial record. Thus, this age precedes biological maturity. Such treatment may reflect rites of passage or symbolic adulthood. It suggests that children were buried with items not just reflecting their life status, but also an idolized role. Graves of juveniles often contain the richest assemblages, as I have mentioned, indicating high status. At the same time, males over 40 years old were sometimes buried with elite items like solid gold herrings or mace head, possibly marking them as community leaders. And thank you for your attention.